Well, what feels like a lifetime ago now, I was on a train to Leeds. It was the start of March, and I was sat in my seat. And as I was sat in my seat, I couldn't help overhearing the conversation that was happening behind me. Or at least, if I could help it, I didn't. A lady was talking to her friend and explaining how she'd been feeling unwell: cough, temperature, weeks of exhaustion. Now, understandably, as I heard this, I started to feel a little concerned, and that concern only increased when I heard her say, "Yeah, it started not long after I got back from China last month." It was as she said that it dawned on her, seemingly for the first time, that she might have had the coronavirus. Well, at that point, I knew too much not to be anxious, but was still too British to risk causing even a slight scene by getting up and moving somewhere else in the carriage. So I did the only thing that was left to me, and I hunked down in my seat, pulled my jumper over my mouth, and prayed to God that I wouldn't get sick. That, I think, to date, is my closest encounter with the coronavirus, which I realize makes me incredibly privileged. It may be that you've encountered it much more closely. You've seen it firsthand in the hospital you work in. You've experienced it firsthand as you yourself have got sick. You've suffered from it firsthand as someone you love has died from the disease. This week, as we ask, what would Jesus say? We're moving from the more general question of what would Jesus say to our coronavirus world to the much more personal one. What would Jesus say to someone suffering from the disease? In Mark chapter 1, Jesus meets a man who is suffering from leprosy. Now, as you'll know, leprosy is a terrible disease, and in this time it had no cure. The only protection for society at large was for those who were suffering with it to isolate themselves, which will sound familiar to us. And so having leprosy meant that you were socially outcast. But it also meant in this setting that you were religiously outcast. Under Israel's Old Testament laws, there were various situations in life that rendered someone unclean. This meant they couldn't engage with the normal cycles of Israel's life with God. They couldn't visit the temple. They couldn't take part in the feasts. They were socially distanced from God. This symbolic system was intended to act as a massive visual aid. It was there to highlight the way that sin actually cuts us off from God. So, as well as being desperate to be healed of this debilitating and isolating disease, this man would have been burdened by this constant reminder of his need to be restored to God and have his sins forgiven. And it's in that vein that he comes to Jesus. And we see his desperation in the way his approach to Jesus is described. A leper came to him, imploring him, and kneeling said to him, "If you will, you can make me clean." It's striking that the man doesn't doubt for a moment Jesus' ability. It's whether or not he's willing that he's wondering about. Now, perhaps he's just being polite, he doesn't want to come on too strong. Or perhaps he is genuinely unsure if Jesus will want anything to do with him. After all, no one else has wanted anything to do with him for his whole life. But whatever it is, he must have been blown away by Jesus' response. Moved with pity, he stretched out his hand and touched him and said to him, "I will be clean." Three things jump out here. Firstly, did you see how Jesus feels? He's moved with pity. The original term is really strong. It means stirred up in your innermost being. It's a very powerful emotion tinged with anger. That's how Jesus feels. Secondly, did you see what he did? He reaches out and touches the man. Now, that's the ultimate no-no here. It's like hugging someone with the coronavirus. But that's what he does. But thirdly, look at what he says. "I will be clean." I do want to cleanse you, and I will. And astonishingly, just like that, the leprosy is gone. And immediately the leprosy left him, and he was made clean. Now, so far, so amazing, but also perhaps what you would expect Jesus to say and do. He's compassionate, and he makes the person better. But it's at this point that the whole episode takes a really strange twist. The man is healed. What's Jesus going to do now? console him further, move on and heal someone else, or invite him to join his disciples? No. He says something else to him. He firmly tells him to go away. And Jesus sternly charged him and sent him away at once. And he sends him off to the priests in Jerusalem so that he can make all the offerings the law requires and be declared definitively clean. The man is healed, his leprosy is gone, but Jesus doesn't consider him truly better. It's not until he's been declared clean, restoring his relationship with God, that Jesus thinks this matter is closed. When Jesus says he willed the man to be clean, he really meant it. He really wants him to be truly clean. And at that time, that meant a trip to the priest was needed. So that's what Jesus says to this man with leprosy. What does he say to someone with coronavirus today? Well, we know how he feels. That same stomach-churning compassion, that pity, that deep concern, a concern that's bordering on anger that this suffering is happening. If he met someone with the virus, he wouldn't run away and isolate from them. His concern wouldn't be for his own well-being, it would be for theirs. Now, if this episode with a leper were an isolated incident, we might not be able to draw such strong conclusions. After all, even the stoniest heart can be moved to a moment of compassion when faced with those who are desperate. But this isn't an isolated incident. Read the Gospels and they're jam-packed full of Jesus doing this sort of thing, and they culminate in the most extraordinary moment of Jesus coming alongside us in our suffering. Because the God of the Bible is a God who knows what it is to suffer. He knows it personally, because Jesus, God the Son, has suffered agony himself. He suffered physical pain, emotional torment, social ostracization, the anguish of the prospect of death, and the horror of actually dying. So we know that he identifies it with us in our suffering. When we call out to God from the depths of our suffering, we're calling out to someone who knows what we're going through. What would Jesus say, though? That's our question. What would he say to someone with the coronavirus? Well, he'd say something similar to what he says to this man. I will. Be clean. Which immediately raises a question. Why, if he's willing and able to heal, doesn't he heal everyone? Why are so many who contract this virus not getting any better? Why even do those who ask God to heal them not always get better? Well, that is a big question, isn't it? I'm sure we can all feel that. It's not one to be brushed aside. And if you're not someone who knows and trusts God yet, I can see why that would feel like a big question, and perhaps even a hard question to get past. Now, ultimately, it's not a question we can answer. Why do some get coronavirus and suffer really badly and even die? Well, we might be able to answer that question medically one day, but that won't explain why that person was born predisposed to get sick or into circumstances that made them more vulnerable. These are matters where God knows and we don't. But this episode with the leper does offer some insight into the broader question of why God doesn't just take away all the suffering. And the insight comes in that strange thing Jesus says in the second part of the passage. Go, show yourself to the high priest. Because when Jesus says to us, I will be clean, he wants more than just our physical well-being. If you think about it, any recovery from disease is just a temporary one. Whenever we get sick and recover, we've gone into remission, but we know sickness can come back at any moment. It might not be the same sickness. It might not even be a sickness caused by disease. It might be a sickness brought on by old age or by being hit by a bus. But all healing is only temporary. All any doctor can ever do for us is give us some more time. Say Jesus had healed this man of leprosy, but he hadn't sent him to the temple. The man would be well, but he'd still be symbolically unclean, still socially distanced from God, and still actually cut off from God because of his sin. He'd still need cleansing. The same is true for us. If all Jesus can offer us is physical healing, he's not really any better than a doctor with a good medicine cabinet. When he says to us, I will be clean, he wants more for us. He's got a bigger priority. He wants us to be truly clean, clean from all our sin, clean in God's sight, clean to enjoy life with God now and forever. Clean not because of any sacrifice that we offer, but because of the one he offered when he suffered in our place on the cross. That's what Jesus would say to a coronavirus sufferer. What should a coronavirus sufferer say to him? I'm sure they should say, please heal me, and that would be a right thing to say. But perhaps their current frailty might just remind them of their ultimate frailty. And they might turn to Jesus like this man did and say, Lord Jesus, make me clean.